Hi everyone, Neil Snape again to show you how I'm going to do an edit completely in Lightroom without any intervention of Photoshop. So I'm going to take an image that's a raw image, and I'm going to go through the steps that I used to create the image. So if you take a look at the image, it's already has very nice light. It's a mix between daylight at setting sun, and there was an HMI light to add a little bit extra sparkle. You can see the shadow from the HMI because it's a lot sharper than the actual sun that's coming through the window. So let's get started, and I'll take you through all the steps. I'm going to show you how we'll get to an image that looks like the black and white that's on the right from the raw image, and it's actually just a virtual copy of the black and white, which has already had settings applied to that. So let's get started. This is in a compare view, which is C. I'll just press D, and that will take us to develop. You'll notice that they're both still selected. If I had this sync turned to auto sync, it would actually apply all the settings to both at the same time of the one that has the brighter border around it. That means that's the master image. That's the one that's in the target. If I had auto sync applied, it would actually apply all of those settings to the other image as well, but we don't want that. So the way that we select only the front image, there is a shortcut, Command Shift D, or you can just simply click on the outside of the border, and that will take us to only that image. Now, the first thing we're going to do with this image is a little bit different than normal, and that is to crop the image. The fastest way to get to the crop tool is actually just press R. We're just going to drag up that corner until it looks about right, so it's not so obvious that that's the edge of the sleeve. Now, the reason that when I dragged it up I didn't have to hold Shift to constrain is because we had the lock done. If I undo the lock, it means that it's freestyle, freehand, and then I can drag any edge in and out where I want. But in this case, I'll leave it to constrain to the original, and that way it'll be 2/3 format, which is the most popular format from DSLRs. So I think this image looks pretty good like that for the crop. I'm just going to move it. Let's see what happens if I move it over a little bit so it has just a little bit more space. Now, it's looking about right. I think that's good. I might just take it up just a little bit on this side. The closer we get, the more power you'll have in the image. Now, when you have an image, if it's cropped too tight, it actually is a little bit oppressive. So a lot of beauty pictures, you need a little bit more room than to crop right into the face. You have to have a very strong face and a very strong look in the eyes to actually want to go in and crop in. In this case, I had a hairstylist, Sadik, it's fantastic, and I want to keep the hair anyways. I don't want to crop out the hair. So I think that's a good crop, so I'll just press R again, and that takes me out of the crop tool. Now, if you really wanted to, one way to come back to this image that has absolutely no color controls done to it, the only thing we did was change the crop, is to press Command N, which makes a new snapshot. Now you could relabel it as crop only, or just leave it at default. This is just a faster way to get back to the original in case we really decide that we don't like what we've done. Anyways, now in this case I'm not going to use any presets at all, but I'm going to press V. V will take you into black and white. Now in Adobe's wisdom, which is actually absolutely insane what they did, but since the recent versions of Lightroom, they've made it so that when you press V, it actually applies an auto tone in black and white. Well, the only workaround that they have for that, and they probably won't come back to the point where before you had a choice of to have an auto tone or not in black and white, is I've made a preset And the only thing that is in this preset is to reset all black and white tones. I will show you what they did when you're actually in a color mode and you press V. These are the settings that it shows as an auto tone. Now, I could just click on the top of here, and that's exactly what I did to make this preset. Or I can just press on it, and because I recorded that as a preset, means zero out the black and white. Let's get back to the basic panel. You can just click on there, or you can press Command 1 and it will take you back to there. As before I've said, if you right click on any one of these panels, you will see that this is in solo mode. And solo mode gives you that chance to conserve some desktop space by having only one panel open at a time. If I go to any other panel, it will close the previous one and go to that one. So let's go back to the beginning. Now, in this case, I'm just going to see where I can start to get a little bit more shape. Well, if I go too high, it gets quite pasty, which is not such a bad thing, but I don't see any real difference between the eyes and the skin. If I go too much to the left, which means down into the cool temperatures, which is actually a setting that I use often. Most of my presets have a lot of blue in them. In this case, I'm not so sure because it's actually making a lot of texture in the skin. So I'm going to come back to something around here where I have some type of life. You can see it just changing so slightly, and I'm going to see what happens if I go up into the magentas, which is actually going to create a little bit of a rupture in the image because we're using opposite colors. And I'm going to take it back way down and to the bottom of the tint, and I can see that it goes quite flat. So I'm going to take it back up again and just play with it a little bit until I find exactly what I think will make for a decent image. Not bad. I think that's good. Somewhere in around here. Now, for exposure, if I take it up, it's going to get flatter and flatter. Sometimes high contrast images are fine. It shows off the hair well, but we kind of lose the face and we lose the impact of the background, the depth. This image actually needs a little bit more density because we want it to have ever so slightly just more life in it, so more detail. It's the detail that keeps the pictures real. If you go too light and too light in the skin, it starts to look plastically and unreal. Years ago when we did darkroom work, we often chose paper grays that would make the skin tone go white. Well, that was for a different effect. These days, it's just a personal preference, but I like to keep some reality in my pictures, so I keep them a little bit darker and not so washed out. Now, highlights, you can bring that back up again and you can play with it, but you can see it's starting to disappear a little bit. I'm not so sure I will go up in the highlights. I might actually even take them down a little bit. And shadows though, it depends what I do later with it. It looks pretty good. If I pull up the shadows, you can see it gets a little bit smoother and I get some detail. White. Let's go down to here. Now that's really interesting because then you can see if you go too far in the white, it gets again pasty, washed out. And yet if I drop that down, I can actually smooth out the little bit of detail in the whites. So I don't have any real loss of detailed areas. And the blacks, I can start to play with that. Oh, that looks great. So I can take that down a little bit. This is the black clipping. Now we're still going to go into the tone controls, but what I often do, most often, is I don't go directly to tone controls after I use the basic panel, but I go to the black and white settings so I can start to see where those might be. So I'm going to play with the red a little bit, and you can see there is a little bit of red, of course, inside of the lips. Now, it's not such a bad thing to keep that down a little bit. If there are any spots in her skin, they'll probably be emphasized if I drop this, so I won't take it down too much, but I'll leave it somewhere in there. Now, the grays.
most of the grays are coming from the orange because of in the basic settings, the color temperature and color tint are exactly what build the image. So these black and white settings are actually playing on what are set as your temperature and your tint. If you radically change your temperature and your tint, these controls in orange then will no longer be valid, because if the image in the base is very blue, then they won't be playing on that. So I can actually get some free retouching out of this, the orange, because you can see that if I take it down a long way, it emphasizes a lot in the eyes, which is wonderful, but the skin is unacceptable. You can't really do that. Now, you could, if you wanted different parts of the image, you could make one copy like this, and then another copy like that, and there is a setting in the menus you can actually open in layers in Photoshop, and then you could blend the two together. But today's case, we're not using Photoshop. We're doing all of the edit in Photoshop, and there's no need to really do anything in Photoshop itself. So we're doing that in, did I say Photoshop? No, Lightroom. Now, I'm going to take it up a little bit, and you can see the smoothness. It's really nice. Now, you could say it's a little bit pasty. We'll correct that later. We're going to actually brush on a little bit of contrast into the cheeks, do essentially dodge and burn. Here we're not really doing dodge and burn. What we're doing is adjusting the bias of the colors that'll tone and shape the black and white. This one, I can get a little bit more smoothness, but what I'm watching for is I'm watching the eyes compared to the rest of the volume of the face. And you can see it's right around, I think around there. Not bad. Now, greens. Is there green? Yes, there is. Hey, that's, you know why? It's because in the tint, actually, I dropped that to the left quite a bit. So it's actually introduced a certain bias of colors at the base of the image that I can play with in the black and white toning. So there I can drop that down so I actually get a little bit darker in the background. And there's not too much blue. So let's take another look at this and see if when it changes here. It's not bad at all. Looks good. Okay. Now, clarity I don't use very often anymore in the basic panel, because I find it looks very cheap and crunchy overall in the image. And yet, I take a look very quickly to see what it would look like if I added clarity, and then I will do that with brush strokes in the end. So you know that whenever you're in a panel, if you change some of these settings, if you click on the title, it'll take them all back to 0, reset them. Or if you click on any one of the separate titles, it'll take only that one back. Now, tone curves. Before we start in any local brush adjustments, we'll take a look at the tone controls. Now, this one's a little bit radical if I start playing with the highlights in that way. So I'll always say that I only want to shape only the very end of the highlights. And you do that by using this, splitting the start points for the highlights. And then I'm only affecting really the top 90%. Now, go back to the other lights and see if, yeah, that's gonna, I need to keep a little bit of reality in the skin. If I go too light, it's almost washed out and pasty. Some people like that look. I don't think it really is a great idea for beauty, so I'm actually going to take that down a little bit and keep that detail. Now, darks. Depends what's going to happen with, I'm not sure. I like it a little bit up, so I took the darks up, and yet I haven't yet changed this. So if I want to change that, I can actually slide that out so it only affects the lower regions, so that way I can see what happens with the shadows. So I'm actually going to take the shadows up, and I'm going to drop those darks down. That way I'm going to keep some detail in the shadows, and yet make the the cheekbones and whatever's in the darker region, like 3/4 tones, they're going to get darker without changing the blacks. If you ever want to see where you're starting to lose detail, you can either press J, and that's both of the alerts, both highlight and shadow. Or you can, of course, press J again, and it will take them out. Oops. And you can just roll over the top of them, and you'll see. Now, let's go back to the basic panel. So, add 1. And we're going to take that exposure down a little bit even further. Yeah, I think that looks great. Now, the only other thing you have to do, then you can go back to here, see if there's any blue in the image. Nah, no blue. And just the slightest little bit, I can hardly find any aqua. So we're in the greens. So I just went back up and changed some of the things. And I need to find when the eyes start to live and the image comes forward. And it's a completely subjective move, and you can only do that by visualizing. Now, I highly recommend that you use a calibrated screen. I personally, I really love the BenQ SW2700, which is the best monitor in its, definitely in its price range, because it actually beats some of the most expensive monitors out there for photo editing. And this is an extremely reliable monitor for doing this type of editing. I'm just going to tweak it a little bit more and to see when it really just comes alive. And it's right there. That's all that we have to do for the image as far as that goes. I don't think we're going to change anything else. We've already done the tone curves. And if you wanted to do another snapshot, you press Command N. We'll have a second one. That way you could, believe it or not, go back to the cropped image and go back to the image as we have edited. Now, the first thing I always do is I go to 100% and I use my handmade preset, which is Iris Dodge and Burn, and I just run that over the eyes. I have a tendency to go a little bit overboard on it, but it's okay. So the way I like it. Now, that's not bad. If I run it over too far, for example, if I do that, it's going to look artificial really fast. So what I can do, of course, I could have pressed Command Z and it would have taken it out, but I press Alt and it will erase the part that I wanted to see. Now, if I wanted the whites a little bit whiter, I'm going to just go up to here, I'll go to whites, and I'll just put it up just a little bit. But this time I can run over the entire zone because it's going to take in the eyes as well. And made the eyes a little bit lighter. I think that was a little bit too much on this one, so I'm going to take that down. Looks about right. And I'll make it looks good to me. Now, what else can we do? We're just going to take it to exposure. And we're going to go, since it was already up exposure, I just carefully draw over the areas that are already lights. I like to draw around there, a little bit here, not too much though. And it's maybe a little bit too much, so I can drop that down. Now, let's do something with highlights. Oops. Let's go in highlights only. 23. Let's just give it a try. Yeah, it looks pretty good to me. I don't think there's much in the way in highlights there. Everything's good. Next, let's take it to contrast. And we're going to go up in contrast here. So it's like dodging and burning, except rather than using exposure, so density, I'm actually just increasing contrast locally. So I'm just going to make the lights go up higher. That wasn't a very good move, so I'll Command Z. And the other area is a little bit darker. So contrast, I'm going to come back to the eyes. That one. Contrast here. Now, I'll make another one, except this time I'll use exposure. And I'll take that down just -10. A little bit there. It's darker. Underneath. Not sure if I'll do that one. Good. Okay. Yeah, only just a little bit more to do, and we're going to use my custom-made hairbrush. I'm going to drop that in. Run it down here. One more. We're going to go to shadows because we're going to lift the shadows in the hair, especially there, just so it doesn't go too flat. And I'm going to do one more with clarity, and we're going to take the clarity down in certain areas. This avoids retouching, so I'm just dropping that in there. A little bit here, maybe a little bit there in the nose. So it's sort of like contrast, but it's actually mid-tone gamma, and it just makes it a little bit softer, like the transitions between the mid-tones. Now, you notice in the neck, though, it's really quite a few bumps and stuff. And if you don't want to open it in Photoshop, you don't have to. And we could even do that again. We'll go a little bit light on this because the sharpness actually, it can look really bad if you take the sharpness down. Yeah, it looks good. Now, I'll go one more because I just wanted to increase the clarity overall. And around the eyes. Might even go up a little bit more. Okay, good. Now, we've done all the color controls. We've done the dodging and burning as necessary. And if you really want, you can check on the heel brush. And if you really don't want to go into Photoshop, you don't have to. You can just drag. If you just click, Lightroom will find its own point. There's actually an option that you can click and you can help it find a place. But I won't show you that right now. You can just click here and there. Now, if you find that this line is too harsh, well, then you just drag up with the heel, and hopefully it'll find something to blend that in. Did it work? Yeah, it's not bad. Yeah, I think it's good. Believe it or not, I think we're done. So that's a fantastic way to make a great image in Lightroom. You don't really need to use Photoshop. If you get your light right in your images when you're making them, basically the images stay very honest. Photoshop is better at moving pixels. It's much faster and much more efficient. So if you have little bumps, or maybe if there's a blood vessel in the eye that you want to take out, and I would say go for it. And when you do everything in Lightroom up front, normally you shouldn't spend more than 10-15 minutes in Photoshop. For me, it's usually around 5 minutes in Photoshop. I might do something like the hair that's in the back. You could take it out in Lightroom, but it starts to get really slow. And in Photoshop, that's really 10 seconds, not more than 10 seconds. And that's all there is to it. So, if you like this video and you want to see more, well, all you have to do is subscribe to my channel, and I'll hope to get more to you. So there'll be almost always beauty pictures. They can be black and white, color. Check out my site, by the way. If you sign up to my email, you get some free Lightroom presets that I've had made that work really well. So check it out. Thanks. See you again.